What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are hopping into a 2024 fantasy football draft through Underdog Fantasy. So it's the middle of the month of June. We will be running these all off season long, leading into the month of September. We are streaming these on a weekly basis as well, but I like to do some of these videos where I kind of break things down kind of round by round and let you guys kind of see my strategy unfold round by round while I'm hopping into one of these drafts. So if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe down below and leave me a comment with what you guys think about today's draft. And if you guys are new to Underdog Fantasy, you can of course get a 50% deposit match up to $250 with promo code The Catch. That link is in the description for this video as well. And we are running private drafts through Underdog all off season long on our free Discord. Link for our Discord is down below as well. Without further ado, let's hop into today's fantasy football draft. All right, so kicking off shortly here in about 30 seconds, we come in at the 1.2. So not my favorite spot to draft from, but we essentially know here in the first round, we are going to come out of the first round with one of those top tier wide receivers of our choice: CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're probably going to be able to touch that top tier wide receiver. Or every now and then you see Christian McCaffrey get passed on at the 1.1, and whoever has a 1.1 wants to get a CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill. But I've only seen that happen like once or twice so far this offseason, so we'll see. But we know we're either going to get C-Mac or our choice of one of those top tier wide receivers. So for me, I still kind of have CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill atop of the tier there, and then I think Chase, JJ, Amon-Ra come into kind of the second part of that tier, so to speak. But for me right here, I'm probably still going with CeeDee Lamb. I think if you want kind of an upside piece here, you could go with Tyreek Hill, but for me, I kind of go for a little bit more consistency, so I'll take CeeDee Lamb here. And that's not to say that Tyreek Hill is not consistent by any means, but I like both these guys a lot. I think it's important to try and get exposure to both of them. And really, when we look at this top tier of wide receivers going into Jamar Chase, JJ, and Amon-Ra after CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill, I do definitely think it's smart in these Underdog drafts to get yourself exposure to all of these guys because they're all going to have phenomenal fantasy football seasons. And really, when we're looking at the first round, after those wide receivers are taken, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, and kind of bleeding into the second round. You might see the end of the first. Beginning of the second round kind of flip flop a little bit here, but Jahmyr Gibbs, then Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London. I think you should be getting exposure to all these guys. I mean, I really think, the first kind of 15 selections in fantasy football right now are just all extremely phenomenal football players. I mean, that's why they're getting taken where they're getting taken in these drafts. But man, I just think that we really have a unique season where I don't feel bad about like anyone in any way that's coming off of the draft board in those first 15, 16 selections. So get yourself exposure to all these guys. And now looking into the second round, we know that we have picks 23, then in the third round, right at the beginning of the turn, we have pick 26 as well. So usually for me, luckily on Underdog, you can just scroll down the entire list of players and look at ADP and kind of plan ahead. Now, get prepared. If you're new to best ball drafts, sometimes, I mean, you're going to see some crazy things happen, right? Like I saw Joe Burrow go in the third round the other night just because the same user had selected Jamar Chase. Like, I mean, sometimes people aggressively chase stacks. They aggressively, select players just from the same team, whether or not be a quarterback wide receiver stack, but maybe like they go aggressively after Devonta Smith after selecting AJ Brown. You just never know, right? This is best ball. These are Underdog drafts. While they are definitely the sharpest drafts in fantasy football right now, sometimes some people have some very specific strategies in mind. And every now and then you see ADP kind of, go against what it's supposed to be. And you see people do some unique things. But for the most part, you can take a sharp look at that list and just easily scroll down and see where players in your draft range are going to be going. So we're kind of in a unique spot where you're looking at like Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, Devon Achane, Malik Neighbors, and Devonta Smith. So for me, I'm not necessarily in love with any of those players. The player I probably like the most is Mike Evans, and I do like Deebo Samuel there as well. And I think we're going to be able to select, one of those players before Devonta Smith kind of comes into play here. And I'm a fan of Devon Achane, especially in a best ball format, but overall, I'd rather get him in the third round if possible. And quite frankly, there are some running backs who we can talk about the minute here who I might like just a tad bit more than Devontae Shane. But for me, starting off with these underdog drafts, there's really like one and a half strategies that I really like, right? I like to come out really aggressive at wide receiver, get 3 or 4 wide receivers in a row. Don't forget, this is a play 3 wide receiver format. So even though it's half PPR, wide receiver typically holds the most merit in these drafts. Outside of that, I like to either go hero running back or double hero running back. So more than likely here, we're going to try and get either 2 wide receivers. I picked 23 and 26, or a wide receiver and a running back, and then consider that first running back our quote unquote hero running back. So unless Saquon Barkley falls out here, I don't really see us going with 2 running backs at 23 and 26. I see us probably going wide receiver, running back, or running back, wide receiver. But if Saquon Barkley does fall out here, which I have seen happen in a couple drafts, because once again, you have a lot of users who want to get 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. But man, I'll tell you guys, I am very, very, very high on Saquon Barkley. I know a lot of people out there are. His ADP has moved up as the offseason has progressed, and I think it's going to continue to do so. And there he goes at the 2.9. But yeah, if I'm at the end of the second and Saquon Barkley is there, there's just no doubt I'm taking him. But I think we can really have our choice of wide receiver here. Mike Evans, Malik Neighbors, Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, your top players at wide receiver. Then your top available running backs are Devontae Shane and Kyron Williams. So I will go with Mike Evans here. And then we'll talk about some things that I like about getting CeeDee Lamb and Mike Evans here in a second. But I will say, like I said, we're going to go running back at pick 26. And if you wanted to go triple wide receiver here, I'm totally not against that either. But the guy that I really like here, that I've talked about a lot on stream, is going to be Derrick Henry. Okay. I like Kyron here. I like Devontae Shane here. We're in the 3rd round, so I'm comfortable taking those guys, right? Devontae Shane, the injury risk is there, right? But the upside is just basically uncapped, right? And even in a best ball format, right? If your player's not showing up every single week, they can still be a good selection because they're still adding to that season point total as the season progresses. So I think the other thing that's nice with drafting Devontae Shane is you can get both of the other Miami Dolphins running backs at a pretty cheap price if you do want to try and quote unquote handcuff him later in your draft. And then looking at Kyron Williams, right? There's been some, I mean, there's a point in the offseason where Kyron Williams was going beginning of the 2nd round and even in like some mock drafts, like into the 1st round. But he has started to kind of drift back in drafts. I think the injury risk is kind of becoming a thing with Kyron Williams, but not just that. A lot of people very high on rookie running back Blake Corum. And in recent years, for the most part, the Sean McVay offense has deployed multiple running backs. And last year was kind of an anomaly, but don't forget, there were multiple weeks last year where Kyron Williams did not play. And I think those 2 things, Blake Corum, the injuries, are kind of starting to get in people's minds a little bit. But nonetheless, for me, I just really believe in Derrick Henry this season. If you guys have been following the channel this offseason, you guys have heard me talk about this a million times. Gus Edwards had 13 rushing touchdowns in that offense last year. I don't see any reason why Derrick Henry can't have double-digit rushing touchdowns this season in a very solid, very consistent fantasy season. So I'm all in on Derrick Henry in the 3rd round. I like to go for consistency, although upside is definitely important, and upside is definitely important in best ball drafts. I like to kind of come out of the gate for the most part and get some consistent pieces for my roster. Okay, so let me know in the comments. Derrick Henry, Devontae Shane, Kyron Williams, who would you guys select as the rest of the 3rd round is filled out with wide receivers? So looking ahead to picks 47 and 50, I don't mind grabbing a second running back here, especially if a guy like Isaiah Pacheco's there, who I'm very high on. And other names that I like in that range would be James Cook and Rashad White. Even if we're technically going a little bit against their ADP, we have to remember we're at the turn, so like we're not going to get another player until pick 71 and 74. It's okay to kind of select players against the turn. If we're looking at wide receiver at picks 47 and 50, truthfully, I really like this tier. T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk. Some of these guys will probably be gone by then. Terry McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, Keenan Allen, Jaden Reed, Calvin Ridley, Xavier Worthy, Chris Godwin. 1 or 2 different tiers there. The guys I'm looking at sharply would be Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown, And I do like Amari Cooper there as well. But Hollywood Brown is the guy I'm drafting the most of in that tier, probably followed by Christian Kirk. But one thing that I wanted to make note of that I kind of briefly mentioned there is, when we're looking at the wide receivers that you get in the first couple of rounds, could be first 2 rounds like this draft, could be the first 4 or 5 rounds, really depends on your draft. But I definitely want to correlate late round quarterbacks to the early wide receivers that I'm taking. Okay, so like if we go Hollywood Brown here, it's more difficult to go out and get a stack with Patrick Mahomes because right now Patrick Mahomes' ADP is 48.7 and he's a QB4 off the board. So, for example, we could go Hollywood Brown here at 47 and then Patrick Mahomes at pick 50 or vice versa. And then we have a Chiefs stack. And then we get Rashee Rice probably a little bit later in this draft, maybe at pick 71, 74. But I would rather pay a lighter price at quarterback and go after quarterbacks that I still think are going to be very good this season, like Dak Prescott, who has a ADP of 93.5. And, maybe very good is not the right term for Baker Mayfield, but he's such a cheap quarterback right now. He was a QB 10 in fantasy last season, and he is currently going at an ADP of 168.2. So a very, very cheap quarterback. Nonetheless, here, I'm going to go ahead and take Hollywood Brown off of the board. I feel very good with Hollywood being my wide receiver 3. And like I said, I mean, if you want to go Mahomes here and then try and load up on the Chiefs wide receivers, Rashee Rice is at an ADP of 76, and we have pick 74. If you want to go in there, I don't have any problem with that. The other thing we could do here, if we don't want to draft Patrick Mahomes per se, is just go ahead and scoop up Xavier Worthy, and then you still have 2 shares of the Chiefs' offense without having to go in at the quarterback position because right now we're kind of strategically planning on going with 2 cheaper quarterbacks. The other option here is we go running back, whether it's Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, whoever you like the best out of that tier, or you could go ahead and try and get a kind of top tier tight end and a Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid, who are still both on the board. I will say I'm slightly higher on Dalton Kincaid, but I like both options quite a bit. So, actually, really a lot of good value here and a lot of good different options. And you know what? I think we're going to go ahead and go in at tight end, and we're going to go Dalton McBride, Trey McBride. Sorry, we're going to go Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, a completely fine option there as well. If we went running back for me, it's probably James Cook, but I don't have a problem going with Rashad White there. I'm very high on both players, so whoever you like better there, I think you go with running back. If we did go wide receiver, I think strategically the best thing to do would be to go Xavier Worthy, load up on that Chiefs offense. But once again, I think we are in a position where we can get Rashee Rice a little bit later, get some exposure to the Chiefs offense if we want to. And me personally, I'm not worried about the Rashee Rice suspension, especially if he's coming off the board as like your wide receiver 4 or 5. I think it's going to be a light suspension. You guys might disagree. But in best ball, especially as the season goes on, I don't think it's going to make a major impact to your guys' team. So I have no problem making part of your strategy going out and getting a guy like Rashee Rice, especially if he's a wide receiver 4 or 5 for your team. Okay, I will say, if you get tight end in the first 5, 6, 7 rounds, which isn't something that I always do, you're going to make a sacrifice somewhere, right? That's naturally how it works. So right now, we're a little bit light at running back, and we want to go ahead and strategically start to map out what running backs can we get kind of in the quote unquote dead zone or a little bit later. So I would look at pick 74 as a viable option. We can get a guy like Alvin Kamara or David Montgomery. Maybe Kenneth Walker falls out. Every now and then, Joe Mixon slides back in these drafts, believe it or not. So he might be an option. But nonetheless, I'm okay with any of those guys as my RB2. As long as I have an RB1 I'm comfortable with, I'm not going to freak out if we don't have the best kind of later round running backs. I'm always okay with my best ball builds, having running backs who are kind of in the lower tiers because I think it just allows you to especially load up at wide receiver, maybe get an elite player at tight end, maybe get an elite quarterback who's part of a stack early. And there were plenty of running backs looking at guys like Rashad White, David Montgomery, James Cook, or DeAndre Swift, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, who were very, very good in fantasy last season, especially in best ball formats as well. So, entering the 6th round, I think looking at pick 71, we go with the best available wide receiver. Kind of a weird tier here, and I would probably go against ADP here and get a guy like Deontay Johnson, who I feel really good about. Rashee Rice, who even, as my wide receiver 4, already having Hollywood Brown, I love getting that exposure to the Chiefs offense. Or Christian Watson. Christian Watson, a player that I feel really good about going into the coming season. I get it. Hamstring issues. Trust me, I had a lot of exposure to Christian Watson last year. But once again, even if a player isn't 100% fully healthy all the time, they can still be viable best ball options. So, top available quarterbacks as we come up to these next 2 picks: Stroud, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Prescott, and Jordan Love. So, really, what we need here is for Prescott to fall out to pick 95, which can certainly happen. Right now, when we're looking at ADP, it's pretty much matching up to where most of these quarterbacks typically go. But Prescott's ADP is 93.5, so there's a chance we miss him. But right now, I think it makes more sense for us to go wide receiver, running back with these next 2 picks than to go ahead and ensure that CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott stack. So the other thing is one of the cheapest stacks in best ball is Bryce Young and Deontay Johnson. So, like, do I want to draft Bryce Young? No. But if he's my quarterback, like 3, then I'm okay with that. Most of my builds just have 2 quarterbacks, but if I have to throw that stack on there, it doesn't really hurt anything because you can generally get Bryce Young with one of your last 2 picks, and it's like, okay, it doesn't really hurt anything, right? So, I like Deontay Johnson. I think he's going to have a very consistent season. You look at what Adam Thielen did as a wide receiver 1 in that offense last year. This is not going to hurt anything, where he's going in drafts. So, let's go running back here, though, and let's get David Montgomery, who I prefer as a RB3, but if he ends up as my RB2, I'm still okay with it. This offense is still going to be very good. If you look at the last couple games of the season, a lot of people talk about, Jahmyr Gibbs taking over that backfield for the Lions, David Montgomery kind of falling off. But when you really break it down from weeks 10 through week 18, double digits in fantasy every single week for David Montgomery. So I'm not worried about him whatsoever. Okay, I don't think we can really go wrong here. Deontay Johnson, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson. I kind of laid out the reasons why I like all those guys, but I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson here. The other thing to kind of keep in mind here, if we did go Christian Watson, which I think is completely okay here, if we don't get Prescott at 95, Jordan Love's ADP is 96. So that would have been a smart move too, because then we can still kind of go in on a different stack, being the Green Bay Packers. And I will say, the Packers, the ability to stack the Packers offense feels really good at this point in the offseason. I mean, like, let's say we went Christian Watson there at 74. We got Jordan Love at 95. Then looking ahead, Romeo Dobbs' ADP is 104. We could easily get him at that pick 98. Now we're going to miss out on Jaden Reed, of course, but then Tavion Wicks's ADP is 119. So, and then on top of that, Luke Musgrave has an ADP of I think 152. So we could get him all the way down here at like pick 146, and then you've like really, really, really invested in the Packers offense, so they better be good this season. But yeah, it's just a way to create kind of a major stack for an offense. But we'll see if Prescott falls out to pick 95 or not. So far in this round, no quarterbacks taken, all wide receivers, Najee Harris and Evan Ingram. So looking ahead to picks 95 and 98, there are some wide receivers that I like, kind of that 98 range, but I think it's going to make more sense for us to grab our 3rd running back. So I'd like to see DeAndre Swift fall out, but it's probably just not going to happen. Let me know in the comments how you guys feel about Swift going into this season. I am a Swift believer. I was a Swift believer last offseason. I get it, though. Not everyone loves him in fantasy. So looking ahead more realistically at pick 98, we're probably going to be looking at guys like, it doesn't feel great, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Tony Pollard. And then we're going to look ahead to picks 119 and 122 as Zamir White goes a little bit early tonight. And we're probably going to end up with a guy like Gus Edwards, maybe Devin Singletary, maybe Brian Robinson Jr. as our RB4. And if not, probably a guy like Austin Eckler. So we'll kind of see what happens here before we start planning too far ahead. But our main objective right now here in the eighth round is to get Dak Prescott, ensure that stack with CeeDee Lamb, and move right along. So the other option, if we're looking back here, is we got Dalton Kincaid in the fifth, right? We could have gone wide receiver or running back there. Maybe we have one more running back that we feel good about. Maybe it's James Cook, Rashad White, Kenneth Walker. And then we have Monty. And then I think we're still okay at wide receiver nonetheless. But one thing I have found with a lot of best ball drafts, like last season, I really went after late round tight ends exclusively because generally in most fantasy football drafts, I just don't draft tight ends till the later rounds. Last year, there's a lot of good value at tight end in later rounds. Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, even guys like Cole Kmet. I mean, there are even guys like Evan Ingram who were going pretty late last year, right? So you know, there were disappointments as well, like Pat Fryermuth, but then there are other guys coming up off the waiver wire last season at points like David Njoku and Dalton Schultz who are valuable. But obviously, in best ball formats, we can't do anything about the waiver wire. So I think it's a little bit important to go ahead and try and ensure you have a valuable tight end early on, because if you just don't have that value at tight end as the season goes on, it can really be a huge hit to your best ball teams. All right, so we do get Dak Prescott here. I'm going to go ahead and take him. And here's an interesting thing about like if you are chasing the stack, right? Um, Kyler Murray's here, Joe Burrow's here. There's probably plenty of you guys out here who would rather have one of those two guys, but I think the best move for this team is to go ahead and get Dak Prescott and ensure that stack. But I'm certainly not in a position where I feel bad about Joe Burrow or Kyler Murray. So I think with this pick here at pick 98, we just have to go with the best available running back. I like Romeo Dobbs, Rashid Shaheed, Khalil Shakir, Tyler Lockett. There's some names there at wide receiver, but I think ultimately we just have to go best available running back. Let me know who you guys like the best: Javonte Williams, Devin Singletary, Brian Robinson, or Trey Benson. I actually like Javonte Williams going into the season, so I'm okay with taking him there. But if you guys are higher on Devin Singletary or Brian Robinson Jr., I don't necessarily have a problem with that. All right, so currently we are sitting at Dak Prescott as our quarterback, Dalton Kincaid as our tight end, Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, and Javonte Williams as our running backs, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown, and Deontay Johnson at wide receiver. We currently have two running backs with a Week 14 bye and two wide receivers with a Week 11 bye. So we'll try and keep note of that. But I try to not let bye weeks take over my draft. I still want to try and follow my strategy and just get the best team put together at the end of the day. Okay, looking ahead here, we got picks 119 and 122. So this has been a heavy running back draft, and you guys are going to see there's certain points in the draft. Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th round sometimes if you're lucky, but running backs just start to drop like flies, and there is a really aggressive drop off after about pick 128, 134. Once you lose Jerome Ford and Zach Charbonnet, and then I think some people would argue Nick Chubb at 136 as well, you are just purely looking at handcuffs and rookie running backs, which these guys can be important. And I think you should identify one or two players in that range that you like, because you're probably going to have plenty of builds where you need an RB5. Maybe you're going to have builds where you need an RB6, and it's going to have to be a dart throw. And there are names that I like. We won't get into it till a little bit later. But I'm just telling you guys the drop off at running back in these drafts is very aggressive. And I'm not even someone who really drafts super aggressive at running back unless I'm at like, the 1.7 or later. Like I'm going to get a Bijan Hall or Gibbs or at the right time. I'm going to get a JT or Barkley at the right time. And I'm very high on Derrick Henry. Then there's kind of names here in the middle: Pacheco, Rashad White, Cook. I still like Etienne and Walker. But I'm okay with Josh Jacobs there as well. I like Joe Mixon. I like David Montgomery. I think Ramondre Stevenson's a good value. Like there's names throughout the draft that I like or I might target, but I just don't let running back really be my vocal point of these best ball drafts, especially with how valuable wide receiver is and how valuable stacking a good quarterback with a wide receiver is as well. So I don't let running back take over my drafts, but we'll kind of see what happens. And you have to really identify some of these later round running backs. I think it's really valuable in best ball. But looking ahead, we'll hope to get Gus Edwards at 119. He is the RB2 on the board right now. Only Tajay Spears in front of him. So there's a good chance we're looking at Chase Brown, Blake Corum, Austin Eckler, or Zeke. And I like Jerome Ford a lot. I don't think Nick Chubb is going to play that much this year. So I'm pretty much in on Jerome Ford. And even if it's only 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, as long as Ford is out there, I feel very good about him. Looking elsewhere, though, we're either going to go double running back here, lock up our 5 running backs, and then go in at wide receiver, get a late round quarterback and a late round tight end, or we go running back, wide receiver here. We have picks 143 and 146. I'm telling you guys, like, we'd be looking at Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, Antonio Gibson. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some opportunity there. People are going to argue, but I just don't feel good about it. So, like, if we can go Gus Edwards, who's now the top running back on the board, with Tajay Spears gone, and Jerome Ford, I feel good here. If we have to pivot to one of these other guys, then that's fine. Looking at wide receivers, this is a strange kind of tier. And we'd really be looking at pick 122 here. So Dontavion Wicks, Brandon Cooks would be the guys I go with, especially already having Prescott and CeeDee Lamb on this team. And there goes Gus the Bus. I kind of expected that to happen. But, there's also a chance that maybe one of those guys falls out. Probably not to pick 143. But then, like, when we do look ahead to pick 143, you got guys like Ricky Pearsall, Jermaine Burton, Darnell Mooney, Adam Thielen. It's not great, but there are some names there. So I think with Gus the Bus going, we just go ahead and we lock up a player that we feel good about. And I'm going to take Jerome Ford off the board here. You could really go with any of these guys. Chase Brown, Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott. It's a little bit against ADP for Jerome Ford, but he is a player that I feel the best about right there. So don't have a problem with taking him whatsoever. Okay, moving ahead, Brandon Cooks is off the board, so I didn't really expect that. I like Dontavion Wicks. I like Jacoby Myers right here. But I think for all intents and purposes, we just take our last running back off the board, make this an RB5 build. And don't get me wrong, if there comes a point in the draft that we feel better about another running back on the board than whatever other position, then we can go with that as well. But I'll go ahead and just take. I mean, there's actually definitely an argument to take Zeke right here. So you know what? With already having the correlation to the Cowboys on this team, I am going to go ahead and take Ezekiel Elliott. Chase Brown would be the other option, and I don't mind Zach Charbonnet. Or there's definitely an argument to just take Nick Chubb right there and lock up the Browns' backfield. But we'll go ahead and we will take Ezekiel Elliott, and we will move right along. So now, for me, we're going to queue up our late round quarterbacks, first of all. So we only have 4 wide receivers, but I feel pretty good about this wide receiver room. CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown, Deontay Johnson, right? But that means we want Baker Mayfield at pick 167. And we might have to monitor that closely. Right now, we got Goff, Herbert, Cousins, Stafford, Rodgers, Watson, and not a lot of people are really high on Baker Mayfield anyways. So we have a little bit of a buffer, right? And then we want to take a look at tight end. Okay, we have picks 143, 146, 167, 170 to play with. So there's definitely a couple options here, right? I would really just like queue up your first tier here as Dalton Schultz is taken, who I really like in this range. But Fryermuth, Hawkinson, Komet, Musgrave is probably the last kind of tier here for me. And I'm okay with Luke Musgrave for sure. Actually, I'm very high on Luke Musgrave this season. Hawkinson feels really nice to draft, but then we have to remember Hawkinson can miss anywhere from like 6 to 10 weeks. Like, we don't really know what's going on with his injury status. So the upside is there, at the second half of the season for sure. But, especially having a player like Dalton Kincaid makes you feel better because you already have a very valuable tight end as your tight end 1. But just keep that in mind too if you guys are going after Hawkinson in late rounds. But having that out of the way, right? We're going to go after Baker. And quite frankly, this is a draft where it makes sense to go after Bryce Young. So we're not really worried about quarterback right now. We are trusting in Dak Prescott, who was the QB3 in fantasy last year, to take us to the promised land, right? And then in tight end, we're going to try and knock out another like kind of late tier, late round guy that we like. And then, we can get a guy very late in this draft like Jatavion Sanders and get another piece of that Panthers offense. Once again, I don't think this Panthers offense is going to be great, but I always say it. Bad offenses still produce valuable fantasy players. And right now, the two players that I kind of like the most on the Panthers offense are truthfully Deontay Johnson and rookie Jatavion Sanders. So we can get Jatavion Sanders and Bryce Young at an ADP of 192 for Bryce Young and 210 for Jatavion Sanders. So I don't feel bad about that whatsoever. But now that we have that out of the way, late round tight ends, late round quarterbacks queued up, we are going all in at wide receiver. We can still keep an eye on running back, but yeah, that drop off has happened. Kendre Miller, Rico Doodle, I call him Doodle. I know it's not how you say it. Marshawn Lloyd, Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, Tyler Algier. There's some names here. Okay. And if you want to take one of these guys at some point, fine. But our main concern is loading up at wide receiver. We want to come out of this draft with at least 8 wide receivers. So there are some guys that I really like in the 167, 170 range. I think we're in position to take those guys, but these are also names kind of going against ADP. Randall Robinson, Demario Douglas, Demarcus Robinson, guys that have all seen their ADP rise up slightly in the past couple of weeks. So looking here ahead to pick 143, I mean, I'd be really happy with Jahan Dotson. Feel okay about Gabe Davis. Xavier Leggett's there. Speaking of the Panthers, I like Jermaine Burton. I think he's going to have a good rookie season. You got Roman Wilson. You got Adam Thielen. Didn't really expect this to be like a major Panthers stack, but sometimes that just kind of happens, right? I'd be happiest with Jahan Dotson. I still like the upside that he brings going into his 3rd season. But nonetheless, we'll just kind of sit back and see what happens. This is the time in the draft where you're going to get a good mixture, right? If you look at the board, okay, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and some quarterbacks all sprinkled in here. So I think with these next 2 picks, we get a tight end and we get a wide receiver because I think at picks 167 and 170, I'm still going to be able to come away with 2 wide receivers that I feel good about for sure. So we'll see what happens. Jahan Dotson is now the top rated player on the board. I don't really think he's going to fall out to us, but you just never know, right? I mean, other teams might have other needs, and that's what happens. So I'll take Dotson here, and I'm happy with Dotson as a wide receiver 5 for sure. And then I pick 146. You could go TJ Hawkinson. This is a team where it makes sense because, like I mentioned earlier, we got Dalton Kincaid as our tight end 1, but it doesn't really matter because he gets selected at the 13.1. So we will take Cole Kmet at the 13.2 as our tight end 2, and I'm feeling pretty okay about this team. So the one thing I did forget while I was going over those kind of later round wide receivers is we're supposed to take Baker Mayfield at pick 167. So we'll see. And like I said, Randall Robinson, Demario Douglas, and Demarcus Robinson are all kind of going against their ADP at the moment. So we might see 1 or 2 of those guys selected before those 167 and 170 picks anyways. So we'll kind of see how things shape out here. But right now, we're looking at Dak Prescott, Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, Javonte Williams, Jerome Ford, Ezekiel Elliott, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Dalton Kincaid, and Cole Kmet. So I think so far a pretty well-rounded team. I'm pretty happy with this draft so far, actually. And I definitely think these rounds 14 through 18 are going to be some of the most important picks to kind of round out and finish off this team. So the nice thing is we don't have to worry about running back anymore. We don't have to worry about tight end anymore. A lot of my builds are 2 quarterback, 2 tight end, 8 wide receivers, 5 running backs. So don't forget, if you guys are new to best ball, you are playing 3 wide receivers and you do have a flex. And for me, I prefer a wide receiver in the flex. So like we're really putting a lot of stock into CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown, and Deontay Johnson. But we also have some good names at running back from the RB3 and ahead. Javonte Williams, Jerome Ford, and Zeke feels okay. I mean, if, on those weeks where Dallas is really balling out, right? Maybe Dak has a dump off to Zeke that goes for a touchdown. We have Dak Prescott on this team. CeeDee Lamb also is a good week. So I want to think about things like that. And I feel good at tight end with Dalton Kincaid and Cole Kmet. I know Gerald Everett, now part of the Chicago Bears. You got other new names there, Roma Dunze, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift. You got a rookie quarterback, but I still like Cole Kmet, especially as a tight end 2 behind a guy like Dalton Kincaid. So Looking ahead to pick 167, we could kind of risk it and see if Baker Mayfield falls out to pick 191, but I don't want to risk it. I want to go ahead and get that stack with Mike Evans. Um, the other name to kind of look at in this range, I guess, could be Cade Otton if we wanted to kind of further that stack, but I just don't think that that's necessary. And then the other name to look at is going to be Jalen McMillan, rookie wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I think has a chance to solidify himself as a wide receiver 3 on that team. But he's a guy we can get at like pick 194, so we have some time before we even have to think about him. So right now, I think we're in a good position. We have a quarterback 3 on the board and Bryce Young that we can go after that makes sense, correlates to our team. We have a tight end 3 that makes sense, that correlates to our team, and Jatavion Sanders. I will say if I don't get Bryce Young, then I just don't really see any reason to draft Jatavion Sanders. And once again, most of my builds are 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. So those guys are just kind of there. If there's nothing better on the board, it kind of just gives us more insurance at quarterback and tight end. But for the most part, my main focus here is just drafting wide receivers that I feel good about after we get our QB2, theoretically, in Baker Mayfield. So, I know a lot of people in this range prefer Aaron Rodgers. Some people even prefer Deshaun Watson. But like I talked about earlier in this draft, if you do go after a guy like Mike Evans in the second round, can correlate him to a later round quarterback like Baker Mayfield. It feels like it pays off a little bit. If we go after a guy like Drake London in the second, obviously, like this user was able to get Kirk Cousins in the 13th. That feels like it pays off. Um, George Pickens is an interesting one. You can definitely get Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields very late. So I always try to think about that when I'm in these early rounds. Even guys like Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Tua goes at a pretty late rate. Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're going to be able to get Jared Goff pretty late. Joe Burrows, a little bit of a better ADP than recent years for Jamar Chase. Puka Nakua, you can obviously get Stafford late. Garrett Wilson, like I just talked about, you can get Rodgers pretty late. So try to think about that when you guys are taking your early round wide receivers, because I think there's a lot of value in just going after later round quarterbacks as opposed to having to spend an earlier selection on Allen, Hurts, Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, or Richardson, or Stroud. But don't get me wrong, I have plenty of builds where I am going after those players as well. And there goes Baker Mayfield off of the board. So let's take a look at this team. He has Chris Godwin. So that's something to always look out for too. Like, if you have a guy like Mike Evans, don't think you're the only person who's going after Mike Evans. This user has Josh Allen. So kind of a similar strategy in a sense. He has his QB1 who he believes in, and then he gets kind of a lower tier stack by getting Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin. So first thing to go wrong for us essentially so far this whole draft, and get used to that. If you guys have watched me stream these best ball drafts like that, this is something that happens, and you just have to kind of pivot around it. So we kind of have a couple options here, right? We can still take a QB2 and Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson, or we can just go all in on Dak Prescott. So kind of depends on how you look at it, because there are some wide receivers that I like here, and I think you can really do either thing. But I'll just go ahead and take Aaron Rodgers off the board. I think we could have gone back to back wide receivers there, um, or we could have just gone with Aaron Rodgers like we did, and then get a wide receiver at pick 170. So really depends on how you want to look at it. If I did go double wide receiver there, it's some combination of Randall Robinson, Demario Douglas, and Demarcus Robinson. And I like all 3 of these guys, but truthfully, the player I feel the best about is Demarcus Robinson. I think Randall Robinson has some nice upside. I think Demario Douglas can definitely be essentially the wide receiver 1 for the Patriots, but there is some new competition on that Patriots squad, right? So the thing I liked about Demarcus Robinson is I think even as a wide receiver 3 for the Rams, he still holds a lot of really good value. And, God forbid, if anything happens to Cooper Kupp or Puka Nakua, then he is right there in a very good position to step in as a wide receiver too. And don't forget, those last couple weeks of fantasy football, Demarcus Robinson was great. From weeks 13 through week 17, he had 13.2 or more fantasy points in every game with a ceiling of 20.2 fantasy points. He had 4 touchdowns in a row. I mean, weeks 13 through week 16, he had a touchdown every single game. So I think that chemistry is going to bleed over into this season. He got a new contract with the Rams. I just think he's a really good late round value, and he's a guy who's really rising up on draft boards. Um, from the time I'm recording this, just about a week ago, his ADP was like at 189. It's moved up to 181 if I'm not mistaken. And once again, he's a guy I'm willing to take, um, a little bit of ahead of ADP because, like I said, the guys that I like right there are Randall Robinson and Demario Douglas. But also at the end of the day, I believe more in the Rams offense than I do in the Patriots offense or the Giants offense at the moment. But I still like Robinson and Douglas where Randall Robinson, I should specify, and Demario Douglas where they're gone. Okay, so Aaron Rodgers are QB2. This kind of puts me in a position where I do want to draft Bryce Young. Um, just because I still think Rodgers will be fine this year, but I don't know. You guys know how it is, recency bias. When a player's coming off an injury, you always feel, especially when they're a veteran, a little bit shaky. So let's take a look here and see if there's any Jets players in this range, just see if we can get any sort of stack. But yeah, there's nobody here. So, um, I mean, unless we go with like Braylon Allen as like a RB6, I mean, I guess we can put him on our queue, but nothing there makes me feel fantastic. So, I think there's two options at quarterback here: Will Levis or Bryce Young, and some would argue Derek Carr, which I think is fine. Daniel Jones is here. I mean, you got McCarthy, you got Sam Darnold, you got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. There's some names here, and I'm okay with Will Levis or Derek Carr. But ultimately, just because it correlates to our team, I'll take Bryce Young. I mean, I get it, guys. There's gonna be some of you guys out there. If you watch this, you're just gonna absolutely hate on the fact that I'm going after Bryce Young here. But the correlation to your team and the stacking is just really important in these best ball tournaments. So I'm okay with it. But and one thing that I want to clarify too, like just because we didn't get Baker Mayfield, like we talked about going after Jalen McMillan um, with one of these last picks, that's still okay. Like you can still just correlate to an offense. I mean, think about the Dolphins last year, right? This is kind of an extreme example, but there are times where the Dolphins just absolutely balled out. And it's like if you had any Dolphins player, the week they played Denver or whatever, like your best ball team did very well that week. So just keep that in mind too. It's okay to just correlate to one specific offense as opposed to only correlating to quarterback slash wide receiver or quarterback slash tight end, right? All right, so we have 6 wide receivers. This is kind of tough here because we got 3 selections. And we know right now if we go, I don't know if we necessarily have to go with Jatavion Sanders. And if we did, it would be at pick 215. If we look at wide receivers in that range, and it's not very pretty. Um, the guys I like as things start to move along, and I'm probably going to go Bryce Young right here, and then Jalen McMillan is probably my move. Um, Once again, just correlating Tampa Bay's offense, correlating Bryce Young to Deontay Johnson, and we'll move along. And then we know we can potentially get Jatavion Sanders at tight end if we want to. But yeah, in terms of wide receivers available, the guys I like, DJ Chark's gone. I like Odell Beckham still. I like Tyler Boyd. I think with Odell Beckham, it's like if he has 2 to 4 of those weeks where he scores a touchdown, you got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, that insane run game, all lining up for the Dolphins. There's got to be at some point in the season where Odell Beckham scores. So he's going at ADP of 211. I don't mind where he's going as like your final pick. But let's take Jalen McMillan right here. And like I said, yeah, I like Tyler Boyd. I like DJ Chark. Some of these guys have different ADPs. We're like anywhere from ADP like 201 to like 213 talking about these guys. But yeah, after that, I mean, maybe Elijah Moore. It's just tough. It's really kind of ugly to be honest. Khalif Raymond is a name you see get drafted a lot here. Some people like A.T. Perry. I think it's just important to take a look at the guys who are available and kind of figure out in terms of these long shot players who you like the best and kind of make sure they're a part of your queue, right? There's really nobody else, in my opinion, that's worth mentioning. All right, guys. So moving into the last round in our last selection, we're gonna hope Odell Beckham falls out. If not, I mean KJ Osborne is probably the next guy that I take. He's always been one of those guys who, similar to Odell Beckham, the last couple years, like has a couple games where he scores like three-ish, four-ish games, and then you remember, oh, he's a player in the NFL. And I think wide receiver is the most important, position to fill here at this point in the draft. Other than that, I'll just go Jatavion Sanders because at least he correlates to that Bryce Young selection. But right now, your top available quarterbacks are Drake May, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Justin Fields, Bo Nix. Top available running backs are Damian Pierce, who I do like in this range, Donta Foreman, I also kind of like in this range, CEH, Keaton Mitchell, Alexander Madison. Top available wide receivers, Odell Beckham, Elijah Moore, Rondell Moore, Khalif Raymond, Jalen Hyatt. There goes our guy, Odell. Top available tight ends, Jawan Johnson, Jelani Woods, Mike Gesicki, Jatavion Sanders, and Dawson Knox. So I will say the other player at tight end that I would definitely consider with having Dalton Kincaid on this team is Dawson Knox because, if Kincaid misses any time next season, well, Dawson Knox steps right in as a tight end one for the Buffalo Bills. Still has chemistry with Josh Allen. I think every now and then throughout the season is going to vulture some touchdowns from Dalton Kincaid, anyways, because Allen and Dawson Knox have always had a good red zone chemistry. But at the end of the day, Dalton Kincaid's still the guy there. So he's an option too. And just don't forget, like, we're in round 18 of a best ball draft. At the end of the day, you have to get familiar with some of these names that aren't nearly as attractive that you wouldn't be thinking about like in your home redraft leagues for the most part. Anyways, guys that wouldn't be drafted, but these are some of the most important draft selections in your best ball drafts. Don't forget, this is the range where like Puka Nakua, Raheem Mostert, Kyron Williams were getting drafted last year, and those guys were league winners. So definitely still plenty of value in these later rounds. And most of the time, you're probably not going to hit in these later rounds, but you have to try and prepare yourself to be able to hit in these later rounds for sure. So there goes Dawson Knox. He's off the board, not an option for us. And really, I got Jatavion Sanders, Khalif Raymond, and KJ Osborne queued up. I think Donta Foreman's okay here. I think Jerome Ford's going to start the season for the Browns, and I don't think Nick Chubb is going to be ready. And that means Donta Foreman's the RB2 for the Browns. So then if Ford misses any time, Foreman steps in. So we do have Ford on this team. It does make sense, but I would prefer one more wide receiver in this build. And like I said, the guy for me is probably KJ Osborne. I guess Khalif Raymond is technically the wide receiver 3 for the Lions, but I think he's also a player that anyone on the depth chart kind of has opportunity to step in front of. So, nonetheless, we are ticking down here to that pick 215, and that will be our final selection of today's draft. So, if you guys thought today's draft did suck and that I was awful at this, don't forget we are hosting private underdog drafts on our free Discord. It is completely free to join our Discord. That link is in the description. You guys can hop into, I just always have an active one. They're slow drafts until they get filled. They're open. You guys can draft against me as well as other members of the community. And if you guys are new to Underdog, sign up with promo code The Catch. The link is also down below. You will get a 50% deposit match up to $250. Use that free money, draft against me, draft against community, and prove that I am not good at fantasy football. But if you guys thought that I did a good job during this draft and that I helped to explain a good strategy for you guys drafting at the 1.2, then be sure to subscribe to this channel for more future content. That's all I really ask from you guys. Okay. Khalif Raymond, Jatavion Sanders, Donta Foreman, KJ Osborne. They're all here. You could flip a coin. Give me KJ Osborne. I mean, I'm not going to feel, you're never going to feel overly great for the most part about who you take in the 18th round. So all those guys make somewhat sense on this team. Maybe Sanders makes the most sense or Foreman, but I'm okay with KJ Osborne just giving us one more shot at wide receiver and a little bit more depth. So let's see who the final selection is here, and then we'll take one last look at the team, and then we will end today's video. So be sure to hit that thumbs up down below, subscribe if you guys enjoyed the video. And here is, by the way, this was a puppy 2. Plenty entries in some of the other tournaments that have been going on so far this off season, but here is One last look at the team. Sorry, the view is kind of weird for you guys, but Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers, Bryce Young at quarterback. At running back, we've got Derrick Henry, David Montgomery, Javonte Williams, Jerome Ford, Ezekiel Elliott. Wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Demarcus Robinson, Jalen McMillan, KJ Osborne. And then our tight ends are Dalton Kincaid and Cole Kmet. So there it is. There is a 2024 fantasy football draft for you guys. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. And we will have plenty more of these coming out as the offseason continues to progress. So with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on the catch.